Tonight, relax as you listen to a gentle Bible story. Let your mind rest, your body settle, and your heart feel calm. Long ago, in the quiet land of Israel, there lived a man named Jonah, the son of Amittai. He was known among the people as a prophet, a man who listened for the voice of the Lord and carried his words with care. Jonah's life moved at an unhurried pace. His days were shaped by familiar paths, gentle routines, and the deep silence that settles over the land when the sun sinks low and the air cools. It was within this stillness that the call of God came to him. The voice of the Lord did not arrive with thunder or fear. It came calmly, steady and clear, like a breath carried on quiet air. The Lord spoke to Jonah, calling him by name, drawing his attention without force. There was no confusion in the words, no haste, only purpose. Jonah was told to rise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and speak against its wickedness, for the ways of its people had risen before God. The message was simple, yet it carried great weight. Nineveh lay far from Jonah's home, beyond lands he knew well. It was the capital of Assyria, vast and powerful, filled with people who did not know the God of Israel. The city was known for its violence and cruelty, for pride and injustice that touched every street and home. To Jonah, Nineveh felt distant not only in miles, but in spirit. It was a place that seemed hardened and dangerous, a place where mercy felt unlikely and unwelcome. As Jonah stood with the words of God resting upon him, his heart grew quiet. He did not argue aloud. He did not cry out or protest. Instead, a gentle hesitation settled within him. He understood the message clearly, yet understanding did not bring peace. Jonah knew the nature of God, slow to anger and rich in compassion. He knew that if the people of Nineveh turned from their ways, God might show them mercy. This knowledge stirred unease in him, not because he doubted God's power, but because he struggled with God's grace. Jonah thought of Nineveh's past and of the suffering its people had caused. He felt the weight of injustice that seemed unanswered. His thoughts moved slowly, circling the call he had received. There was no panic in him, no rushing fear, only a quiet resistance that grew like a shadow at the edge of his heart. The task before him felt heavy, not because it was loud or urgent, but because it asked him to carry mercy to those he believed least deserved it. The land around Jonah remained still as he considered these things. The wind did not change. The sky did not darken. Life continued gently, as though nothing momentous had been spoken. Yet Jonah knew that everything had shifted. The Lord had called him beyond comfort, beyond familiarity, into a purpose that required trust deeper than obedience alone. Jonah reflected on the nature of God, recalling stories passed down through generations. He knew the Lord as the creator of sea and land, the one who shaped nations and guided history with patience. Jonah had seen God's kindness toward Israel many times. He had witnessed forgiveness extended again and again. Now that same mercy was being offered to a distant city, and Jonah found himself standing quietly between God's compassion and his own reluctance. His fear was not sharp or loud. It did not rush through him like a storm. It rested softly, like a slow tide pulling at his resolve. He feared the journey and the people he would meet. He feared speaking words that might change hearts. And deeper still, he feared that God's mercy would triumph where Jonah longed for judgment. These thoughts did not overwhelm him, but they lingered, shaping his silence. As evening settled and shadows lengthened, Jonah remained still with the call echoing gently within him. The Lord did not press him. There was no threat or warning, only the steady truth of what had been spoken. Jonah understood that he had been entrusted with a message that could bring repentance and life to a city lost in darkness. Yet his heart was slow to move. In that quiet moment, Jonah stood at a crossroads unseen by others. One path led toward obedience and surrender. The other led away, guided by hesitation and fear. The Lord had spoken clearly, and the stillness remained, waiting for Jonah's response. Jonah remained quiet after the call had settled within him. The stillness around him continued, yet his heart began to lean away from the path set before him. Without speaking his thoughts aloud, he chose distance over obedience. It was not a sudden decision, but a gentle turning of the will, like stepping onto a familiar road instead of an unfamiliar one. Jonah resolved to go where the voice of God had not sent him, believing that space might quiet the call he carried. He began to travel toward the coast, moving steadily away from the direction of Nineveh. Each step felt calm and deliberate. The land opened before him with long paths and open skies. Villages passed quietly at a distance. Fields rested beneath soft light. Jonah walked without urgency, letting the rhythm of the road guide him. He did not feel chased or threatened. Instead, he felt a muted relief in choosing a path that felt safer to his own understanding. His destination was Joppa, a harbor city by the sea. It was a place of trade and travel, where ships came and went, carrying people toward distant shores. Jonah had heard of Joppa before. It was known for its openness to the world beyond Israel, a place where one could easily disappear into the flow of travelers. As he walked, the idea of the sea began to shape his thoughts. It felt vast and unbounded, unlike the clear direction of the call he had received. The journey unfolded slowly. Days passed with gentle sameness. Jonah rose with the morning light and rested when evening came. Along the way, he listened to the sounds of the land, birds settling in trees, wind moving through grass, footsteps echoing softly on packed earth. His mind wandered often, but he avoided returning to the words spoken to him. Each mile carried him farther from that moment of stillness where God had called his name. When Jonah finally neared Joppa, the air changed. The scent of salt reached him before the sea itself came into view. The sound of waves followed soon after, low and steady, like a distant breathing. As he approached the harbor, the land gave way to open water stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The sea lay calm before him, wide and mysterious, reflecting the fading light of day. Ships rested at the shore, their wooden forms dark against the water. Sailors moved quietly along the docks, tending to ropes and cargo. There was no rush in their movements. Everything seemed guided by patience and routine. Jonah felt drawn into this calm, sensing that the sea offered escape through its vastness. He believed that if he could place enough distance between himself and the land of his calling, the weight on his heart might finally lift. The sky above the harbor softened as daylight slowly dimmed. Colors shifted gently, pale gold giving way to cooler tones. The sea mirrored the sky, its surface smooth and unbroken. Jonah stood for a time, watching the water move in steady patterns against the shore. The sea felt ancient and unknowable, a place where paths vanished and directions dissolved. In this quiet moment, Jonah felt small beside the water, yet comforted by its openness. The land behind him held memory and obligation. The sea before him promised distance and anonymity. He did not think of consequences or outcomes. His thoughts remained slow and muted, resting only on the desire to move farther away from what had been asked of him. As evening deepened, lamps began to glow along the harbor. Their reflections trembled softly on the surface of the water. Jonah remained there, breathing in the cool air, listening to the gentle sounds of the shore. The sea did not speak to him, yet it seemed to welcome him in its silence. And so he stood at the edge of land and water, having chosen a road that led away from obedience, guided by the calm pull of distance and the quiet mystery of the sea. Jonah moved quietly along the dock as the evening settled more deeply over the harbor. A ship stood ready for departure, its hull resting gently against the pier, ropes drawn tight with practiced care. The sailors aboard spoke in low voices, their words carried softly by the air. They were men accustomed to the sea, their movements calm and unhurried, shaped by long familiarity with tide and wind. Jonah stepped among them without drawing attention, another traveler seeking passage across the water. He offered payment for the journey, and it was accepted without question. There was nothing unusual in his request. Ships in Joppa often carried strangers toward distant lands, and no one asked why a man wished to go where the sea might take him. Jonah felt the quiet relief of blending into the ordinary flow of things. He did not speak more than needed. He simply followed where he was directed and took his place aboard. As the ship eased away from the dock, the sounds of the harbor softened behind them. Wood creaked gently as the vessel shifted upon the water. Ropes loosened and sails were adjusted with slow, careful movements. The sea welcomed the ship with a steady rhythm, waves brushing against the sides in a calm, repeated pattern. Above them, the wind moved lightly through the rigging, producing a low, soothing hum that filled the air. Jonah stood for a time, watching the shoreline recede. Lamps along the harbor grew smaller, their glow fading into the distance. The land that had carried his steps now slipped quietly from view. Before him stretched open water, wide and unmarked. The sea felt steady beneath the ship, neither restless nor threatening. Its surface rolled gently, reflecting the dim light of the sky. The sailors settled into their tasks with ease. Some moved along the deck, checking lines and adjusting sails. Others spoke quietly, sharing brief words shaped by routine rather than urgency. Their voices blended with the sound of the waves and the wind, forming a peaceful pattern that seemed to slow the passing of time. Jonah felt himself drawn into this rhythm, his thoughts growing less defined, his body relaxing as the ship found its course. As night deepened, the air cooled. The sky above darkened gradually, stars beginning to appear one by one. The ship moved steadily forward, guided by hands that trusted the sea. Jonah felt no need to watch any longer. The motion of the vessel beneath his feet was gentle and predictable, rocking him with a quiet consistency. The concerns that had weighed upon him earlier felt distant now, softened by the vastness around him. He made his way below the deck, descending into the sheltered space within the ship. The sounds of the sea followed him there, muted but still present. Water brushed against the hull in slow, even movements. The wood around him creaked softly, responding to the ship's steady progress. The air below was calm and dim, lit only by faint light filtering down from above. Jonah found a place to rest and settled himself without ceremony. His body welcomed the stillness after the long road and the quiet hours of decision. The ship continued its journey above him, but he no longer felt the need to remain awake. The gentle motion lulled him, each sway drawing him deeper into rest. His breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the waves beyond the wooden walls. As sleep came over him, his thoughts loosened and drifted. He did not revisit the path he had chosen or the call he had left behind. For the moment, there was only the steady movement of the ship and the enclosing calm of the space where he lay. The sea carried him onward, and Jonah sank into a deep and untroubled sleep beneath the deck, surrounded by the quiet sounds of water, wood, and wind. The night continued to deepen as the ship pressed onward across the open sea. At first, the change was barely noticeable. The water beneath the vessel grew more active, its steady rhythm shifting into longer and heavier movements. The wind strengthened slightly, brushing across the deck with a firmer touch than before. The ship responded with a gentle sway that was different from the calm rocking Jonah had felt earlier. Above the deck, the sailors became more alert. Their movements slowed and grew more attentive as they sensed the change around them. The sky, once clear and softly lit with stars, began to gather darker clouds. They did not rush or shout. Instead, they spoke to one another in quiet voices, their words careful and restrained. Each man felt the weight of the moment settling in, though the storm had not yet shown its full strength. The wind continued to rise, not in sudden force, but in steady persistence. Waves lifted higher along the sides of the ship, striking the wood with deeper sounds. The vessel creaked in response, adjusting to the pressure of wind and water. The storm was forming with patience, as though it were being shaped rather than released. There was no chaos yet, only a growing awareness that the sea was no longer at rest. The sailors looked toward the sky and the water with measured concern. They were experienced men, familiar with the ways of storms, and they understood that this was no ordinary shift in weather. Fear moved among them quietly. It did not drive them to panic, but it settled into their voices and expressions. Each man felt the need to act, yet they did so calmly, speaking low as they prepared for what might come. Some lifted their eyes heavenward and whispered prayers to their own gods, voices barely rising above the wind. Others moved carefully across the deck, securing what they could, their hands steady despite the tension in the air. The ship rolled more noticeably now, carried upward by swelling waves and lowered again into troughs of water that felt deeper with each passing moment. Below the deck, Jonah remained asleep as the storm gathered strength above him. The calm that had surrounded him earlier began to fade, replaced by sharper movements of the ship. The air around him shifted as the vessel rocked more firmly. The once gentle sounds of water grew louder and more insistent. Even so, Jonah slept on, his body heavy with rest, unaware of the danger unfolding. As the storm continued to rise, the sailors realized that the ship itself was at risk. They spoke to one another in hushed tones, their fear now joined by urgency. Still, there was no shouting. Their voices carried the weight of concern rather than panic. In the midst of this growing trouble, they noticed that one man had not joined them above the deck. Jonah was found below, still lying in deep sleep. The movement of the ship finally reached him in a way he could not ignore. A stronger jolt stirred him, pulling him slowly from rest. His eyes opened as the sound of the storm reached his ears more clearly. The ship rocked around him, and the air felt heavy with motion and noise. As Jonah rose, awareness returned gently but fully. He felt the difference in the world around him, the tension in the air, the restless force of the sea. In that moment of waking, the truth he had tried to leave behind began to surface within him. The distance he had sought could not quiet the call he carried. The storm outside mirrored the stirring within his own heart. Jonah understood then that this was not chance or misfortune. The sea that had seemed calm and welcoming now moved with purpose. As he listened to the creaking of the ship and the growing roar of wind and water, clarity settled over him. The call of the Lord, spoken earlier in stillness, returned with quiet certainty. He knew that the path he had chosen had led him here, into this moment where his calling could no longer be ignored. He steadied himself as the ship rolled again, his thoughts no longer drifting. The truth rested plainly before him, not with accusation, but with calm insistence. The Lord who made the sea and the dry land had not been left behind. Even here, surrounded by deep waters and dark skies, Jonah understood that he was still within the reach of the one who had called him. Jonah stepped onto the deck as the ship continued to rise and fall beneath the darkened sky. The sailors turned toward him, their faces marked by quiet strain and restrained fear. The wind pressed against the sails, and the sea moved with heavy purpose around them. In the midst of this unsettled moment, Jonah spoke without raising his voice. His words were calm, shaped by clarity rather than distress. He told them who he was, a Hebrew, and he spoke of the Lord with steady reverence. He named the God he served as the one who made the sea and the dry land, the Creator whose presence reaches everywhere. As he spoke, understanding settled among the sailors. The storm no longer felt like an unexplainable force. It had meaning now, tied to the path Jonah had chosen and the call he had resisted. Jonah did not seek to defend himself or lessen the truth. He accepted what he knew within his heart and spoke it plainly. He told them that the sea was growing violent because of him, because he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord. There was no trembling in his voice, no struggle to form the words. His confession came gently, as though he were placing down a burden he had carried for too long. The sailors listened closely, their fear deepening, not toward Jonah, but toward the power of the God he described. They asked what should be done, their voices low and careful, as the ship continued to strain against the waves. Jonah answered without hesitation. He told them to lift him and cast him into the sea. He explained that only then would the waters become calm again. The sailors did not act at once. They were reluctant, unwilling to harm a man who stood before them with such quiet acceptance. They tried instead to row back toward land, their efforts slow and determined. Yet the sea resisted them, growing stronger, refusing their attempts. The wind pressed harder, and the waves continued their rising motion, steady and unyielding. Realizing there was no other way, the sailors paused. They lifted their voices, not in panic, but in humble appeal. They called upon the Lord Jonah had spoken of, asking that they not perish for this man's life, and that no guilt be placed upon them. Their prayer was simple and sincere, carried by the wind across the restless water. Then, with careful hands and solemn hearts, they took hold of Jonah. He did not resist them. His body remained relaxed, his spirit settled. There was no struggle as they lifted him. In that moment, Jonah surrendered fully, not to the sea, but to the will of the Lord. His trust was no longer distant or conflicted. It rested quietly within him. As they cast Jonah into the water, the act unfolded without violence. He entered the sea as one entering a deeper silence. The waves closed around him, and the surface of the water settled almost at once. The wind eased. The sound of crashing water faded into a gentle movement. The storm that had built so steadily lost its strength, as though it had completed its purpose. The ship steadied beneath the sailors' feet. The sea returned to calm, its surface smoothing into long, quiet motions. The sudden stillness felt profound, filling the air with awe. The sailors stood in silence, witnessing the power of the Lord made clear before them. The fear that had gripped them shifted into reverence, and they offered sacrifice and vows in acknowledgment of what they had seen. Above the water, the night remained dark and wide, yet no longer threatening. Beneath the surface, Jonah was carried downward into the depths, surrounded by the sea he had tried to escape. Yet even there, within the quiet weight of the waters, the hand of the Lord was present. The storm had passed, and the sea rested once more, holding the moment in stillness. The waters closed gently around Jonah as he sank beneath the surface of the sea. Light faded quickly, replaced by a deep and quiet darkness. The movement of the water slowed, and the sounds of the world above disappeared. In that stillness, the Lord appointed a great fish to receive Jonah. It came without struggle or fear, and Jonah found himself enclosed within it, held rather than harmed. Inside the great fish, there was no violence and no chaos. The space was dark and close, yet strangely calm. Jonah was alive, protected within the depths, separated from the rushing waters outside. The sea no longer pressed against him. Instead, there was a steady stillness, broken only by the faint movement of the creature that carried him. Time felt different there, unmeasured and quiet. Jonah remained in this place for 3 days and 3 nights. The darkness did not change, and the silence allowed his thoughts to slow. With nothing to distract him, Jonah began to reflect on all that had brought him there. The distance he had tried to place between himself and the Lord no longer mattered. There was nowhere else to turn, and in that truth a gentle clarity emerged. His heart softened as he remembered the Lord's faithfulness. He thought of the mercy he had received many times before, of prayers answered and guidance given. In the deep, Jonah understood that even here he had not been abandoned. The God who formed the sea had also prepared this place of refuge. What seemed like the end had become a place of quiet preservation. Jonah began to pray, his words forming slowly within him. He prayed to the Lord his God from the depths, and his prayer rose not in haste, but with careful sincerity. He spoke of calling out in his distress and being heard. He acknowledged that he had been cast into the deep, into the heart of the seas, where the currents surrounded him and the waters passed over him. Yet even as he spoke these truths, his prayer remained calm, shaped by trust rather than fear. He recalled how he had felt driven away, yet still looked toward the holy temple of the Lord. He spoke of the waters closing over him, of the deep surrounding him, of seaweed wrapping around his head. These images came gently, not as terror, but as honest reflection. Jonah recognized how far he had gone, not only in distance, but in spirit. As his prayer continued, gratitude began to take root. Jonah acknowledged that when his life was fading, he remembered the Lord. His prayer, spoken from this quiet place, reached the presence of God. In the stillness of the deep, Jonah surrendered fully. He let go of his resistance and accepted the will of the Lord without condition. His words turned toward thanksgiving. He spoke of offering praise and obedience, of fulfilling what he had vowed. He declared that salvation belongs to the Lord, not as a shout, but as a settled truth. The words rested within him, steady and sure. In this place of darkness, Jonah found peace through surrender. The great fish continued to move through the waters, carrying Jonah within its depths. Time passed quietly, marked only by the gentle motion around him. Jonah remained in prayer and reflection, his heart no longer restless. The sea outside remained vast and unknowable, but within the deep, Jonah was held securely. There, in the silence and darkness, Jonah learned that obedience begins not with movement, but with trust. The Lord had not released him yet, but Jonah was no longer trying to flee. His heart had turned fully toward the one who had called him, and so he remained, held in the deep, resting in prayer and surrender, surrounded by quiet and preserved by the hand of God. The stillness within the deep gave way to gentle movement as the great fish approached land. Without warning and without force, Jonah was released from its shelter and carried back into the open air. He came upon the shore as morning light began to spread across the sky. The sea rested quietly behind him, and the land lay before him, touched by the soft colors of dawn. Jonah lay upon the sand for a moment, breathing in the cool air. The weight of the deep was gone, replaced by the simple presence of earth beneath him and sky above him. The early light revealed a calm shoreline, shaped by the steady patience of the sea. There was no sign of judgment in this moment, no word of rebuke spoken aloud. The mercy of the Lord was shown through release and restoration rather than condemnation. As Jonah rose, he felt the gentle clarity that follows a long night. His body was weary, yet his spirit felt steady and awake. The silence around him was peaceful, carrying no trace of the storm or the depths he had known. The Lord had preserved him, not to shame him, but to guide him back toward purpose. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. It was spoken with the same calm authority as before, unchanged and unwavering. Jonah was told once more to rise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim the message he was given. The call was not altered by Jonah's failure. It remained rooted in compassion and intent, offering him another opportunity to walk the path he had avoided. Jonah listened carefully. This time there was no turning away within him. The fear that once lingered had been softened by understanding. The mercy he had received had reshaped his heart, making room for trust. He no longer sought distance from the Lord's will. Instead, he stood ready to follow it, step by step. The shore behind him held the memory of rescue, while the land ahead represented obedience renewed. Jonah did not rush forward, but he did not hesitate either. His willingness to listen was quiet and sincere, grounded in the knowledge that the Lord's ways are guided by mercy. As the morning continued to unfold, Jonah began to walk inland. Each step carried him farther from the sea and closer to the purpose he had once resisted. The path ahead was unknown, but it no longer felt heavy. He carried with him the understanding that the Lord's compassion reaches beyond failure and fear. The light of dawn continued to grow, illuminating the land around him. Jonah walked on with a steady pace, his heart aligned with the call he had been given. The second chance he had received was not spoken loudly, but it was clear in every quiet moment. The Lord had shown mercy, and Jonah moved forward with renewed willingness, ready to listen and obey. Jonah moved steadily through the morning light, leaving the shoreline behind him and entering the open land beyond. The soft hues of dawn stretched across the hills and valleys, and the gentle warmth of the sun began to rest upon the earth. His steps were deliberate, each one a quiet act of movement guided by purpose rather than urgency. The land was open and wide, fields stretching on either side, dotted with small trees and shrubs that swayed lightly in the morning breeze. Birds moved across the sky in calm formations, their soft calls blending with a whisper of wind through the grass. In this stillness, Jonah felt the presence of the Lord around him, not in force or command, but in quiet companionship and steady guidance. The journey toward Nineveh was long, yet Jonah did not hurry. He allowed himself to observe the world as he traveled. Streams reflected the pale light of dawn, small animals moved quietly at the edges of the path, and the earth beneath his feet carried him forward with gentle assurance. Every step was an invitation to reflection, each moment a reminder of the mercy he had received. Jonah's heart, once restless with hesitation and fear, now rested in calm understanding. He thought of the city that awaited him, vast and distant, and of the people whose lives he was tasked to touch with a simple message. The enormity of the task did not overwhelm him. Instead, it was held within the steady rhythm of his walk and the quiet strength of his trust. As he moved closer to Nineveh, Jonah considered the words he would speak. He carried them simply in his mind, stripped of any adornment or grandeur. There was no need for ceremony, no requirement for elaborate speech. The message itself held power because it came from the Lord, and Jonah understood that it was the truth that mattered, not the manner in which it was delivered. He rehearsed the words silently as he walked. 40 more days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown, unless they turn from their evil ways. Each phrase was measured and clear, spoken first in his heart, then prepared for the lips that would speak it to others. The humility of this task settled over him, shaping his step and guiding his posture. He carried himself without pride, aware that he was only a messenger, and the work belonged to the Lord alone. The land slowly changed as Jonah neared the outskirts of the great city. The fields grew broader, and the distant sound of activity hinted at the life within the walls. Travelers and merchants moved along minor paths, tending to their daily labors with quiet industry. Jonah greeted no one, yet his presence did not go unnoticed. His walk was calm, unhurried, and carried a sense of purpose that others sensed instinctively. He felt neither fear nor pride, only a quiet resolve to fulfill the calling he had received. Each step was accompanied by a gentle awareness that he was not alone, that the Lord's guidance accompanied him with the same steadiness that had carried him through the depths and across the sea. Upon reaching the gates of Nineveh, Jonah paused to gather himself. The city lay before him vast and imposing, its walls stretching high and strong, yet there was a stillness in the streets that welcomed quiet observation. He did not shout or demand attention. Instead, he moved slowly through the city, allowing his presence to be known with modesty and care. The people paused in their routines, noticing the figure moving among them, and his calm demeanor drew their attention without force or alarm. Jonah began to speak, his voice soft yet certain, carrying the simple words of warning and hope. He did not embellish or lecture. He shared only what had been given to him, and he shared it with humility, aware that it was the message, not his own strength, that could bring change. The words settled into the hearts of those who heard them. The message of impending judgment was balanced with the quiet assurance of mercy. The people listened with attention, pausing their labors and gatherings to consider what had been spoken. They reflected on their lives, on the choices they had made, and on the way their actions had shaped their community. The message was received not with anger or defiance, but with a softness of spirit that spoke of openness and contemplation. Jonah continued through the streets, moving steadily and speaking plainly, his presence calm, his words clear, and his heart humble. Slowly, the city responded. Leaders and citizens alike began to take notice, convening quietly to reflect on the warning they had received. Their actions were deliberate, measured by thought rather than impulse. They removed signs of excess and wrongdoing, and their words toward one another were tempered with reflection. Jonah observed without interruption, recognizing that change was taking place in its own gentle rhythm. The repentance was quiet and sincere. People turned from their harmful behaviors, sought forgiveness from one another, and devoted attention to what they could do to restore balance and goodness to their lives. Jonah witnessed this transformation with a quiet sense of fulfillment. He did not celebrate, and he did not speak of victory. His own heart remained humble and attentive to the Lord, understanding that the work of change belonged not to him, but to God who moves in hearts with patience and care. The city continued to respond, adjusting its ways gradually, as though the message had planted a seed that would grow in its own time. Families spoke softly with one another, merchants amended practices, and leaders guided their people with thoughtfulness and renewed purpose. The city itself seemed to breathe more gently, the tension of previous ways lifted by this quiet turning toward mercy. Throughout the journey and the message, Jonah's own spirit felt renewed. The obedience he had once resisted now carried a quiet satisfaction. He moved among the people with awareness, but without haste, delivering the words entrusted to him and allowing them to take root naturally. He did not demand response. He did not seek acknowledgement. He simply walked, spoke, and observed, letting the mercy of the Lord flow through his words and the willingness of the people to listen. Each moment reinforced the truth that change begins quietly, within the heart, and spreads softly into action. The streets of Nineveh remained calm as Jonah continued his walk. The people carried out their daily lives with new mindfulness, reflecting upon the message in their own ways. The hum of the city was subdued, touched by reflection rather than routine alone. Jonah moved with care, observing the small signs of repentance, the simple acts of humility, and the sincere efforts to turn from previous wrongs. The response of the city was not sudden or dramatic. It was gentle, like the first light of dawn spilling across wide plains, unfolding slowly and steadily over time. In every step and every word, Jonah experienced the quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. The message he carried was simple, yet it held the power to inspire change and awaken conscience. The people's response, soft and reflective, created a rhythm of renewal that he could see and feel in the air. He understood the depth of mercy that had been shown to him and now to the city. It was a mercy that invited reflection, obedience, and transformation without coercion, and it unfolded in the soft and steady ways of hearts willing to listen. The journey through Nineveh continued, measured by each step, each word, and each quiet act of listening. Jonah moved through the city with calm presence, delivering the message entrusted to him with clarity and humility. The city responded not in spectacle, but with sincere contemplation and quiet repentance. And in this soft and steady exchange between messenger and people, a rhythm of change unfolded, gentle yet profound, carrying the promise of mercy into every corner of Nineveh. Jonah watched the people of Nineveh quietly change before him. Streets that had once been filled with careless chatter now held a softness, a stillness born of reflection. He observed merchants pausing to reconsider their trades, families speaking with newfound humility, and leaders guiding their citizens with gentleness and care. The city was alive with small acts of repentance, each one unassuming yet meaningful, and Jonah felt the presence of something greater moving among them. The Lord's compassion was at work, touching hearts in ways that no human force could accomplish. Though he witnessed this transformation, Jonah's own heart struggled. He had carried anger and expectation within him, a hope that justice would follow swiftly upon warning. Seeing the city respond with humility and openness stirred a quiet unrest within his thoughts. He wondered why mercy could come to those he had once counted as undeserving. His mind wrestled with the idea that the God who commanded righteousness could also extend forgiveness so freely. Jonah walked through the city streets with measured steps, watching people kneel in prayer, pause to seek forgiveness, and tend to one another with care. Each act of repentance made the struggle within him more vivid, a gentle tension between understanding and experience. The Lord, ever patient, provided lessons in quiet ways. Jonah's struggle did not go unanswered. In the rhythm of his journey and the soft unfolding of the city's change, God's explanation came without words, teaching through patience rather than correction. The gentleness of the people's response reflected God's own approach, mercy given freely, allowing hearts the time and space to turn willingly. Jonah felt this lesson in the calm of the streets, in the slow awakening of the city, and in the steady, unseen hand that guided each soul toward reflection and repentance. God's compassion was evident not in thunder or judgment, but in subtle restoration. The city remained intact, yet its people shifted with honesty and care. Jonah saw leaders pausing to counsel wisely, workers considering the impact of their actions, and families showing concern for one another. The mercy of the Lord was revealed in every small movement, in every softened tone of voice, and in every thoughtful choice. It was a quiet power that transformed without fear, teaching that patience and gentle guidance can achieve what force never could. Jonah's thoughts wandered back to his own journey, from the call he had first received, to the sea that had carried him, to the darkness where he had been held and preserved. Each experience reminded him of the breadth of God's patience and care. The Lord had not abandoned him at any point, nor had he coerced obedience. Instead, he had allowed Jonah to confront his fears, reflect in the depths, and emerge with understanding. This same patience now unfolded before Jonah in the city itself, revealing that God's mercy extends beyond one person, reaching to whole communities, shaping hearts over time. He paused in a quiet square, observing children play and merchants speak gently to one another. There was no pomp, no dramatics, only steady change unfolding naturally. Jonah felt a wave of contemplation wash over him. He recognized that judgment was not the immediate or final expression of God's will. Rather, it was the openness of the heart and the willingness to turn that invited correction and learning. Mercy, Jonah realized, is not weakness, nor is it compromise. It is a guiding hand, a quiet force that redirects rather than destroys, that teaches rather than terrifies. Jonah's own heart shifted slowly, shaped by observation and reflection. He understood that grace is not easily explained in words, but is felt through experience and attention. Seeing the city respond, he began to see the breadth of God's vision, which encompasses both justice and compassion. He thought of the countless acts of forgiveness he had witnessed in his own life, each one a mirror of the Lord's enduring patience. Now he could perceive that the same patience extended outward, touching lives that seemed distant or unworthy in human eyes. The streets of Nineveh continued to reflect quiet transformation. Families moved with renewed mindfulness, merchants handled goods with honesty, and leaders guided with fairness and care. Jonah walked among them with gentle observation, allowing the lessons of mercy to settle into his heart. Each interaction between people, each moment of thoughtfulness, mirrored the care that God had shown him. He began to feel that understanding mercy was less about judgment and more about seeing the potential for change in every heart. God's teaching was subtle, woven through the rhythm of the city's renewed life. Jonah saw that patience and gentle explanation carry weight greater than fear or rebuke. The quiet repentance of the people revealed a world touched by divine compassion, and Jonah felt his own understanding expand. He realized that mercy is a call to reflection, a gentle shaping of conscience, and that God's ways often move in quiet rhythms rather than sudden upheavals. In this realization, Jonah's heart grew calm, aligned with the quiet power of grace and the enduring patience of the Lord. Jonah left the city of Nineveh and settled at a quiet spot just beyond the outskirts, a gentle rise of land overlooking the city's expanse. The morning light stretched across the plains, soft and golden, and a cool breeze carried the faint scent of distant water. Jonah rested beneath the open sky, letting his body ease after the long walk and the work of delivering the Lord's message. The city behind him hummed with a quiet activity, but here, away from the bustle, there was only calm and the gentle rhythm of life. As Jonah rested, the Lord caused a plant to grow near him. It sprang up quickly, its leaves spreading wide to create a comforting shade. The green of its foliage was vibrant against the pale earth, and the sunlight that filtered through its branches fell softly upon Jonah. The shade cooled the heat of the day, offering relief and a sense of shelter. He leaned against the trunk of the plant and felt an unexpected comfort, a quiet ease that seemed to settle not only his body but his spirit. The plant did not speak, nor did it move beyond its gentle swaying, yet its presence carried a kind of silent encouragement. In that small shadow, Jonah reflected on the mercy of God, on the city he had witnessed responding with humility, and on the depths he had been preserved from. Jonah thought about the events of the past days, about the call he had resisted, the storm he had endured, and the darkness where he had been held. He thought about the great fish that had carried him, and the mercy that had allowed him a second chance. The city of Nineveh had turned quietly and sincerely, and Jonah had seen firsthand how patient and gentle God's guidance could be. Here, under the comforting leaves, Jonah felt a fragile sense of contentment, a temporary ease that mirrored the soft whisper of the breeze. Yet, the comfort of the plant was not meant to remain unchanged. The next day, the sun climbed higher, and its light grew warmer and more intense. The gentle breeze that had accompanied Jonah's rest shifted, drying the earth beneath the plant. Slowly, the plant began to wither. Its leaves lost their vibrant green and drooped with the weight of the heat. The shade it had offered diminished, and Jonah felt the first sting of the sun directly upon his shoulders. The coolness and relief he had enjoyed gave way to a subtle discomfort, gentle at first, then gradually more insistent. Jonah looked at the plant with quiet awareness, noting its fading strength. The comfort that he had taken for granted was disappearing, and with it came a sense of humility he had not expected. He realized how easily he had relied on temporary relief, and how quickly it could vanish. The experience reminded him that even blessings and comforts from God are part of a greater design, intended to teach as well as to nurture. The plant had served its purpose, providing rest, reflection, and a pause in which Jonah could consider his heart and his journey. Its fading was not punishment, but a gentle lesson, a reminder of the transient nature of worldly comfort and the importance of maintaining focus on higher truths. Jonah felt a gentle stirring within him as he observed the plant's decline. He had taken for granted the shade it had provided, yet in its disappearance he began to understand that the mercy of God does not depend on permanence in the ways the world expects. True understanding, he realized, comes not from the comfort that lasts, but from the humility cultivated when comfort fades. Jonah's mind turned to the city he had visited, to the people who had quietly turned from wrongdoing. Just as the plant had been a gift and a teacher, the city's response had been both a reflection of God's patience and a call for Jonah to see mercy in a wider perspective. The Lord spoke to Jonah through the fading of the plant. His words were not loud or harsh, but soft and deliberate, shaping understanding without forcing it. "Jonah," the voice said, "you have shown concern for this plant, though you did not labor for it or cause it to grow. It appeared quickly, and you found comfort in its shade. Should I not have concern for Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 people who do not yet know right from wrong, and also many animals?" Jonah listened in quiet reflection. The words were gentle, yet they carried a weight that settled deep within his heart. He thought of the plant and how quickly he had grown attached to its shelter, only to watch it wither. He thought of his own heart, sometimes resistant to God's will, and how easily he had questioned mercy for the people of Nineveh. The comparison between his care for a single plant and God's care for an entire city revealed the depth of divine patience and compassion. The Lord's voice carried the truth that mercy extends beyond human understanding. encompassing all living souls with patience, love, and enduring grace. Jonah's heart softened as he considered this lesson. The comfort he had sought in shade, and the temporary relief of ease, was small compared to the far-reaching compassion of God. The city of Nineveh, filled with people who had not yet known guidance or righteousness, was precious in the eyes of the Lord. Jonah began to grasp the immensity of God's love, not only for those who follow closely, but also for those who are distant, unaware, or in error. The mercy of the Lord was constant and far greater than his own limited perspective. He thought of the way he had struggled with anger and resentment when the city showed repentance, and he recognized the humility required to align his heart with God's perspective. It was a quiet realization, unfolding gently within him, that judgment is not the immediate or final expression of divine will. Instead, love and mercy form the foundation for change. Jonah saw that the lessons of the journey, the sea, the storm, the great fish, and even the simple plant had all led to this moment of clarity. Each had been a step in learning patience, trust, and humility. Jonah remained seated beneath the remnants of the plant's shade, letting the soft wind carry away the tension he had held. The fading leaves no longer offered physical comfort, yet the lesson they provided was far deeper. He recognized that true understanding and obedience come not from what can be taken for granted, but from attentiveness, reflection, and the willingness to see beyond immediate appearances. Mercy, he realized, is not a concept to be grasped lightly, but a living reality that calls for humility, reflection, and compassionate action. The Lord's words lingered in Jonah's mind, expanding his sense of care and responsibility. "All living souls matter, Jonah," the voice continued gently. "The mercy I extend is not limited to those who are near or familiar to you. Every creature, every heart, every being is within my concern. Learn to see as I see, to feel as I care, and to recognize that patience and love are the instruments through which hearts are guided." Jonah absorbed this lesson with quiet reflection. The city of Nineveh, now turning toward repentance, the plant that had offered and then withdrawn its shade, the experiences of the storm and the great fish, all of these were connected by the same thread of patience and mercy. He understood now that his own expectations, frustrations, and judgments had been narrow, and that God's view encompassed far more than he had considered. Each moment of his journey had been a preparation for seeing and accepting this truth fully. He rose slowly, taking in the gentle warmth of the morning light. The city of Nineveh lay spread out before him in the soft glow, and he could see the quiet signs of reflection among its people. The lessons of the plant and the Lord's voice settled into him like seeds taking root in fertile soil. He felt a renewed sense of humility and compassion, a recognition that mercy is always the greater path, and that life itself is precious in every form. Jonah's heart had opened to the fullness of the Lord's teaching, a patient guidance that reaches both the reluctant and the willing, the small and the great, the temporary and the enduring. In this shaded space, now cleared of the plant, Jonah's understanding deepened. The lessons of love, patience, and mercy unfolded before him like the quiet movements of nature. He saw the city's repentance as a living example of God's compassionate care. He remembered his own journey through reluctance and fear, through the storm and the deep, and he felt the gentle shaping of character that had accompanied each trial. The fading of the plant was no longer a loss, but a reminder of the humility required to receive and recognize mercy fully. Jonah remained in quiet contemplation, feeling the fullness of the Lord's care for all living souls. He understood that mercy is a gift extended not only to those who are obedient, but also to those who are distant, unaware, or slow to turn. The patience of God is woven through every experience, every teaching, every gentle correction. The city, the plant, and his own life all reflected the same truth, that love and mercy are the sustaining forces of creation, guiding hearts toward reflection, humility, and renewed purpose. The morning sun continued to climb, casting soft light across the plains and illuminating the city of Nineveh with quiet clarity. Jonah stood slowly, letting the warmth settle across his shoulders and arms, feeling the steady rhythm of the world around him. The lessons beneath the shade had planted a lasting awareness in his heart. He recognized the value of humility, the necessity of reflection, and the power of mercy that extends far beyond human measure. God's compassion, Jonah now understood, is patient, gentle, and universal, reaching to every living soul with steady, unwavering care. The day unfolded with soft light and gentle warmth, and Jonah remained attentive to the lessons he had received. Each moment was a reminder that love, mercy, and patience are not fleeting, but living truths to guide thought, action, and heart. He felt the quiet satisfaction of understanding, a calm that rested deeply within him, shaped by experience, reflection, and the patient guidance of the Lord. The shadow had faded, yet the lesson remained, enduring in the gentle clarity of mercy and the quiet humility of a heart open to understanding. Jonah settled onto the soft earth beyond the city, feeling the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze on his skin. His heart was calm, no trace of anger or frustration lingering, only quiet understanding and peace. He reflected on the mercy he had received, the second chances granted, and the quiet obedience that had guided him back to purpose. In these moments, he understood that faith grows slowly, even in hearts that wander, and that grace is patient, reaching into every corner of life with gentle persistence. Jonah closed his eyes softly, letting the rhythm of the earth and the whisper of the wind carry him into a deep and restful stillness.